A member of the British Guard was suffering from the heat when a little boy of about 11 years old ran up to him and started showing him something on his phone. The guard looked closely, his vision slightly blurred by the sweat that ran down his cheeks, into his ears. His bearskin hat felt like a furnace atop his head. Every part of his body ached, his knees locked, his lower back burning, his fingers numb despite holding the rifle with trained precision. On the boy's phone, two cartoonish figures named Tung Tung Sakhur and Tralalelo Tralala were dancing in a ridiculous, jerky battle, each one louder and more absurd than the other. It made no sense to him, but something about the nonsense almost brought a half-smile to his sunburnt lips. Almost. And then, chaos. A scream split the warm London air near the buffet cart across the square. A woman, dark-skinned and loud, was waving her arms in the air. "He just laughed at my child," she yelled, pointing at the guard. "That man, he smirked, racist bastard. Just because my boy's black, yeah?" People turned. A ripple moved through the gathered tourists. Phones came out faster than anyone offered help. The boy who had shown the video looked stunned. "He didn't. I just showed him a funny video, miss. He didn't say anything." But the woman wasn't listening. She marched closer, camera now in hand, recording. "Look at him now, standing like nothing happened. I'm going to make sure everyone sees what you really are." The guard remained still. He had done nothing. He could do nothing. That was the rule. No reaction. No emotion. Not even a blink in some cases. His orders were centuries old, burned into tradition. He was a king's guard, a sentinel of history. Yet in this moment, the ancient uniform felt like a costume, in a theater where the audience had grown cruel. Within minutes, the video was online. A short, shaky clip. An angry woman accusing a silent man in red of racism. No context, no truth. Just emotion, just narrative. By the time his shift ended, it had already gained over 60,000 views on TikTok. "Stone-faced racist guard goes viral," one commenter wrote. Another, "These old royal creeps still think they're above the rest of us." As he stood in the locker room later, peeling the soaked uniform from his back, he heard two younger guards whispering, "Poor sod. He's trending for just standing still." He stared into the mirror. His eyes were bloodshot, the skin under them hollow. He had dreamed once of serving the crown with pride. He had imagined his grandfather, who served in Normandy, would have been proud. Now he was a meme, and all he had done was stand still. He arrived for a shift the next day an hour early, like he always did. Routine was the only thing left that still felt like discipline instead of punishment. As he polished the buttons on his scarlet tunic and brushed his bearskin hat in long, even strokes, his phone buzzed on the bench behind him. He ignored it. He already knew what it would say. More comments, more mockery, more half-informed opinions from people who had never worn wool in July, never stood silent while strangers turned them into a spectacle. The guard's name was Thomas. He was 31 years old and had served in the army for 6 years before joining the household division. He'd done a tour in Afghanistan, been under fire, seen friends fall, and yet nothing had prepared him for the absurdity of being hated by people simply for not reacting. He stood again at his post outside St. James's Palace. The sun was out in force. The tourists were back, louder, brasher than before. They had seen the video. They wanted more. A young man, late teens, maybe early 20s, swaggered up with a group of friends and a phone already recording. "Oi, mate," he said, putting on a thick mock-posh accent. "What happens if I tickle your chin, yeah?" The crowd laughed. Thomas remained still. Another lad ran up and dabbed at Thomas's boots with a Union Jack napkin. "Oi, he's got dust on him. Gotta keep the king's toy clean." A can of Red Bull was dropped, deliberately, right at his feet. The spill crawled toward his polished boots. Still, he didn't flinch. They circled him like he was some zoo animal, a statue made of meat and tradition. Their phones were out, filters on, captions being typed in real time. Then the punchline. Someone shouted, "Oi, say something if you're not racist." Laughter again. Phones outstretched like weapons. One tourist, not local, probably Eastern European by accent, turned to another and said, "This is why the British Empire fell. These clowns." Thomas heard it. He heard everything. But the rules were the rules. Flashback. He remembered his training. Cold mornings, silent marches, the unbearable heat of rehearsal week before trooping the color. He remembered the pride in his mother's face when he first donned the red coat. He remembered a letter from his grandfather, yellowed and folded, that said, "Hold yourself like Britain still means something, even when it doesn't." But standing here now, surrounded by jeers, recorded by hundreds of people who'd never asked his name, Thomas felt like a wax figure. An hour later, a young woman stood near him for a selfie. She pulled a face, stuck her tongue out, then turned her back and began twerking in front of him. "Still nothing?" She laughed. "He must be dead inside." That one hurt more than most. Not because it was provocative, but because it was true. He had begun to feel dead inside. As his shift neared its end, a middle-aged man in a battered leather jacket stopped a few feet away. He didn't take a photo, didn't joke. He simply stood there. Then, with no expression, he raised his hand to his brow and gave Thomas a sharp, military salute. Thomas blinked slowly, almost involuntarily. It was the only acknowledgement he would allow himself. For a moment, it was silent. Then the crowd surged again, and the salute was forgotten by everyone, except Thomas. A week had passed since the video went viral. It had been reshared, stitched, captioned, distorted, and exported into 1,000 versions, none of them truthful. Thomas had not said a word. He had not moved a finger, but the world had screamed on his behalf, and none of it in his favor. His commanding officer had called him in briefly. "We've reviewed the footage. You didn't break protocol," the officer had said, almost apologetically. "Still, we're under pressure. Social media's turned the whole thing into a racial incident. Just keep your posture clean. You're a symbol, not a person out there." Not a person. That was the line that stayed with him. It echoed through his skull as he stood on post again that Friday morning. The square was already busy by 9 a.m. tour groups, school children, influencers, and a growing group of people who now came not to honor the changing of the guard, but to challenge it. 2 teenage boys stood nearby, filming with shaky hands and exaggerated accents. "Oi, soldier boy," one sneered. "Did the Queen tell you to ignore black women too, or was that just your idea?" A ripple of awkward laughter. A few looked uncomfortable, but no one stopped them. Then one of them stepped forward, held his phone up and spat, right on the pavement near Thomas's boot. He didn't flinch. His eye twitched. He was screaming inside, but not a muscle moved. The teen stepped back, proud of his performance. "Look at that, not even blinking. Must be racist and brain dead." Later that day, That clip hit Instagram. Thousands of likes, dozens of laughing emojis. Not one person asked what Thomas had actually done or endured. Behind the scenes, nothing changed. No public defense from the regiment. No official correction. The palace, as always, remained silent. The only conversation he had that day was with a German couple asking for directions. They were lost and confused. He broke protocol just slightly, pointing them toward the main road with his eyes and a discreet turn of his head. They smiled, thankful, unaware of the discipline it took to offer even that. He was invisible in every way, except when someone wanted to blame, mock, or record him. That night in the barracks, he sat alone. Other guards were out drinking, laughing, blowing off steam. But he felt heavy, worn. He looked through old photos on his phone, his army days, a picture with his squad in Helmand, the sand in their boots, the pride in their eyes. He had once felt useful. Now he stood still for hours, only to be treated like a symbol of oppression, by people who neither knew him nor cared to. The world had moved on. It no longer wanted honor. It wanted reaction, rage, content. He wasn't supposed to give them that. But he didn't know how much longer he could resist. That's when he opened his locker and found a letter folded neatly between his gloves. No name, no return address. It read, "To the man behind the bearskin. I see you. My son was one of you. He died in Kandahar. You stand for something the rest of us forget too easily. Don't let them break you. Some of us remember." Thomas stared at the note for a long time. It didn't fix anything. It didn't change the rules. But it reminded him that someone still believed he mattered. And for tonight, that was enough. The next morning, Thomas stood in front of the mirror in the barracks. His tunic was buttoned perfectly, his boots polished to a mirror shine, and his bearskin hat rested on the bench beside him. His fingers hesitated for a moment before placing it on his head. He had never felt heavier wearing it. Outside, the morning crowd was forming. London in summer was always alive. Too alive. Noise, motion, endless camera clicks, and messy crowds that wanted a reaction. But not a story. A tradition they could mock, but never carry. As he stepped out to begin his shift, the air was unusually still. About 20 minutes into post, he noticed a man standing quietly across the barrier. Older, with weathered eyes, in a stiff gait. He didn't film, didn't smile, didn't speak. He just stood there, arms crossed, watching. Then slowly he nodded, not out of mockery, but recognition, soldier to soldier. It was subtle, but Thomas noticed. The man turned and walked away without taking a single photo. A few hours later, Thomas was on break, sitting in a quiet corridor behind the main gates, when a journalist from a local paper arrived. She had requested brief access. Not an interview, just observation for a human interest piece. She had seen the viral video, and something about it didn't sit right with her. She watched Thomas prepare for his second half of the shift. Quiet, efficient, focused. "You don't say much, do you?" she asked gently. "I'm not paid to talk," he replied without a smile. "Seems like you're paid to stand there and get humiliated," she said, half joking, half sincere. He said nothing, but that line landed. Later that week, she published her article, "The Man Behind the Bearskin Hat." She didn't name him, didn't quote him. She just told the story from what she observed and what she felt. The heat, the loneliness, the abuse, the patience. She included quotes from military historians about the significance of the Guards. Interviews with former soldiers who said standing post was harder than combat. Because in combat, You can fire back. It was a quiet article, respectful, human, but something about it resonated. People began sharing it. Veterans reposted it with comments like, "Finally, someone understands." Even younger readers, some who had laughed at the viral videos, paused, rethought. Not all, but some. That same week, Thomas saw the boy from the original incident again, the one who had shown him the strange dance video. This time, the boy wasn't laughing. He stood behind the rope line, beside an older man with a weathered army badge on his cap. The boy looked up at his father. The man nodded. Then the boy turned, stood straight and saluted. Not playfully, not mockingly. Thomas stood still, but something shifted in his chest, just slightly. After a shift, he was walking along the inner path when the man approached him quietly. "I served in the Falklands," he said. "My old man was in the Navy before me. I saw what they did to you last week. I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that." Thomas nodded, slowly. It wasn't the kind of apology that changed the world, but it wasn't hollow. "Why do you keep doing it?" the man asked. Thomas thought for a second. Then he replied, in the simplest way he knew how. "Because if we don't stand for something, we fall for anything." The man smiled faintly. "Well," he said, "you're standing, even if most people don't deserve it." And then he walked away. 2 weeks after the incident, things began to shift. Quietly, not dramatically. The flood of mockery online slowed. The videos were buried under new trends. Someone falling off a hoverboard, another influencer meltdown. The internet always moved on faster than the damage it left behind. But the article, the man behind the bearskin hat, had stayed in circulation. People still passed it around in quiet corners of the internet that weren't just noise. Veterans forums, history blogs. Even a teacher in Manchester used it in a school assembly about respect and duty. One morning, Thomas arrived at his post like always. Tunic perfect, rifle polished, chin up. But something felt different. A hand-painted sign sat behind the crowd control rope. Just a small one, taped to the railing. It read, "He stands so you don't have to." Thank you. It wasn't viral. It wasn't loud. But it was real. More importantly, some in the crowd seemed different. Not all of them. There were still tourists, still the odd teenager trying to provoke a reaction, but fewer. And now, every time someone acted up, others stepped in. "Oi, leave him be. Show some respect. He's not part of your bloody TikTok." It wasn't a revolution, but it was something. Then came the letter. It was official, sealed, delivered to his barracks. It was from the Ministry of Defense. They'd seen the article, read the interviews, reviewed the abuse, and they wanted to update the Guards' training protocols to include social media harassment scenarios, to review the possibility of Guards having limited rights to signal for assistance when being verbally abused or physically provoked. Small steps, nothing radical, but steps nonetheless. They had also approved a commendation in quiet recognition of Thomas's restraint and dignity during the incident. It wouldn't be made public, but it would go in his file. And that mattered. It meant someone in command understood what had really happened. That standing still under centuries of tradition didn't mean becoming a punching bag for modern chaos. That evening, as Thomas removed his bearskin hat, he paused and looked at it differently. Not as a burden, but as something earned. He walked to a nearby bench and sat down. The sun was low, golden. A pensioner with a walking stick and medals on his blazer sat beside him. You one of the guards? The man asked. I am, Thomas replied. The old man gave him a long look. Saw what happened to you. Can't imagine keeping still through all that. Bloody disgrace. The way they treated you. Thomas just nodded. Then the man leaned forward and said quietly, I was captured in 44. POW camp for 8 months. You know what kept me sane? Thomas shook his head. Discipline. Posture. Remembering I was still a soldier, even when I was just meat to them. The old man turned to him. You did that. You reminded us, even when they mocked you. For the first time in weeks, Thomas allowed himself a real smile. It didn't erase the hate, didn't fix the ignorance, but it reminded him why he stood. Not for a crown, not for applause, but for something older, quieter, stronger, dignity. And in a world of noise, that was the loudest thing of all.